Pariyatti Audiobooks presents A Buddhist Approach to Economic and Social Development, From Facing the Future, by Bhikkhu Bodhi, narrated by Shalina Hetherington. A Buddhist Approach to Economic and Social Development. In this paper, I will be using the Buddha's teachings as a lens through which to examine the conception of economic and social development prevalent in today's world. If, as I contend, a Buddhist model of development is fundamentally incompatible with the dominant one, it is important to understand the reasons why. Thus, I will first examine, from a Buddhist point of view, the model of development currently endorsed by most mainline economists and social analysts. Having shown the flaws in this model, I will then sketch some guideposts towards an alternative program of economic and social development based on Buddhist principles. Since I am not by training an economist and really have very little knowledge of this area, my comments will have to be very general. But as long as they are in accordance with the spiritual and ethical principles of the Dhamma, even generalities can be helpful. The notion of economic and social development has today become the rallying call of politicians, business leaders, and policy planners clear across the globe. This notion thus exercises a tremendous influence on the lives of all human beings, both at the personal level and as a determinant of social policy. Although the Buddhist text prescribes certain principles to guide human beings in their economic and social activities, the notions of economic and social development that dominate current policy formulation have no precise parallels in earlier epochs. Thus, to give adequate treatment to our topic, it is not enough merely to listen to the canonical texts. Rather, we must draw out the implications of such ideas as economic and social development in their bearings on present-day social policy. Then we must use the profound perspectives offered us by the Dhamma as a tool for evaluating them and judging their worth. The goal of economic and social development currently being pursued by most developing nations is governed by a model represented by the West, particularly by the United States. Political leaders and business magnates, both East and West, take it for granted that the Western economic system provides the standard for the rest of the world to follow, offering the panacea for humanity's most persistent social problems: poverty, violence, and injustice. The word development implies a scale along which countries can be ranked according to their relative success in fulfilling this ideal. Those countries which successfully implement the ideal are called developed, and those which haven't yet made the grade are said to be developing. It is assumed as a matter of course that all countries are moving along a single track in the same direction, with the West out ahead and the rest of the world struggling to catch up. The chief characteristic of a developed country in this sense is determined almost exclusively by its economy. A developed country is understood to be one in which the economy is driven by the application of high technology to industrial production and commercial services. The trajectory of development is defined by both vertical and horizontal axes. The vertical axis is innovation in techniques and products. The horizontal axis, expansion in production and distribution. In such a society, the rest of the social order is subordinated to the economy in such a way as to enable the economy to function with maximum efficiency. The rationalization offered to explain this form of social organization is that an efficient economy, marked by mass-scale production and wide distribution of goods, is the indispensable means for promoting the general welfare. By constantly raising levels of production and distribution, its proponents hold a superabundance of wealth will be created, which will eventually trickle down to everyone, thus ensuring that everyone gets a share of the cake. It is on this theoretical foundation that the West has pursued unchecked economic growth since the days of the Industrial Revolution, and it is in awe of the West's enormous technological prowess and material affluence that the rest of the world has chosen to follow its lead. This model has deeply impressed the leaders of Asian countries throughout the Buddhist world, who seem almost without exception committed to developing an economy geared to industrial production and the use of high technology. Thus it is of paramount importance to those responsible for guiding the future of Buddhism in those countries to contemplate this model in its many ramifications. A detailed examination of this conception of economic and social development would require at least a full-length paper, but in this short presentation I intend to raise two simple questions. First, is it really feasible for the rest of the world to emulate the Western model? And second, if it is feasible, is it really desirable for us to take this route? The first question is quite independent of a Buddhist point of view, since it involves considerations that do not hinge on any particular religious commitment. The second question, however, brings in a Buddhist perspective and asks whether the Western approach to development is truly compatible with the spirit that animates the Buddha's teaching. Is it feasible for all? The first question can be answered very simply. Not only is it unfeasible for the rest of the world to pursue the road to development taken by the West, but it is virtually impossible for the Western economies and those of newly industrialized countries to continue along this track much longer without jeopardizing everyone. The pursuit of economic development through high technology and industrialization has brought in its trail consequences that verge on disaster, threatening to undermine the very support systems on which sentient life depends. The human economy does not operate in an infinite expanse capable of providing an inexhaustible supply of resources. It operates rather in an ecosystem which is closed, finite, and extremely fragile. When the economy expands, it does so by absorbing into itself more and more of the resource base of the ecosystem, and by burdening the ecosystem in turn with its waste. The ecosystem imposes a limit of 100%, beyond which nothing more remains for consumption. But long before the human economy reaches that limit, it will cross a threshold point beyond which the delicate fabric of the ecosystem will be damaged so badly it can no longer sustain higher forms of life. We may already be very close to that threshold. We have no sure way to know in advance, and as natural systems can disintegrate from below very slowly, the final catastrophe may not become evident at once. With the human population due to increase by 50% over the next half-century, the stress on the environment is bound to rise to even more perilous levels, which will be stretched still further by the global pursuit of economic growth. Not only is it reckless and irresponsible for the countries of the Third World to head down the road of expansive industrial production, but our very survival as a species will require that we place unrelenting pressure on the North to drastically cut down on current high levels of production and consumption and adopt new models of economic organisation more conducive to the ecological health of the world. Is it desirable at all? The second question I posed assumes, contrary to actual fact, that the Western model of economic development is ecologically feasible, and asks whether it would still be desirable from a Buddhist point of view. Once we have seen that the model portends ecological disaster, it might seem unnecessary even to raise this question. Such would indeed be the case if human beings were really as rational as they claim to be. But like moths heading towards a flame, our leaders and policy planners still seem drawn towards economic growth as the master solution to the weighty social problems pressing so heavily on their lands. Therefore, a brief discussion of this question is desirable. In reply, I would say succinctly that the Western model is not desirable, on the grounds that it has inescapable economic, social, and cultural consequences, which from a Buddhist perspective are unmistakably pernicious. Let us briefly examine each category in turn. A. Economic. The proponents of global capitalism advocate continuous growth as the means to eliminate poverty and ensure general prosperity. The slogan that expresses this bit of conventional wisdom is, quote, "The rising tide will lift all boats," unquote. However, after over 50 years of incessant global development, we find the gap between rich and poor wider than ever before, and increasing almost in tandem with the degree of economic growth. The gap has widened both between the rich and poor nations of the world and also between the rich and poor within most of the world's nations. Over the past half-century, economic growth has expanded 5-fold, international trade 12-fold, and direct foreign investment by 24 to 36 times. Yet today, a higher proportion of the world's population is living below the poverty line than ever before. The population of the North, which makes up 20% of the world total, receives 80% of world income, while the bottom 20% takes in only 1.4%. The combined incomes of the top 20% are 60 times larger than those at the bottom 20%. This is twice as high as in 1950, when they were only 30 times larger. In short, the economic growth of 50 years has not brought the universal benefits promised in such glowing terms. To the contrary, the wealth generated has accrued to a minuscule minority, the corporate and financial elite, while increasing numbers, now in the West as well, sink deeper into insecurity and poverty. B. Social. The social consequences of the industrial growth economy are equally grim. A traditional Buddhist society is characterized by a high degree of social cohesion and a strong sense of community. Its members linked in a rich web of relationships from the family on up that confer a deep sense of personal anchorage. Most people earn their living by subsistence agriculture, craftsmanship, and small-scale trade, occupations which bring them into direct contact with those who purchase and consume their products. Spiritual guidance comes from the Sangha, the order of monks and nuns, who not only pass on to the lay community the teachings of the Buddha, but also stand at the acme of civil society as living examples of the spiritual virtues needed to win the ultimate goal, Nibbana. Enter the market economy, beginning from the colonial era, and the complex web of sustaining relationships is twisted into a tangle. Small farms are dismantled in favour of large estates used to grow cash crops for sale on the global market. Small industries are driven into extinction by the arrival of the transnational corporation, artisans rendered superfluous by cheap mass-produced goods, the small retailer driven into bankruptcy by the spread of the supermarket and chain store. As people are dispossessed of their land and businesses, unemployment soars, and large numbers drift towards the cities, seeking employment in factories and accommodation in the spreading slums. There they toil at tedious tasks for long hours and low wages, sometimes under dangerous conditions. Hit by the blows of the market economy, the close bonds of community are suddenly sundered. The blow can be traumatic. People find themselves adrift in the sea of distrust as the close personal ties so characteristic of traditional society give way to cold, impersonal confrontations between nameless faces in the crowd. Instead of cooperating to promote the common good, people are subtly forced to compete with each other in a brute struggle for subsistence that can be won only by bending others to one's advantage. Family relations also disintegrate. First, the closely knit extended family dissolves into the self-enclosed nuclear family. Then the nuclear family in turn splits up, leaving behind broken marriages, lonely adults, and emotionally deprived children. The degrading nature of this social system is clearly evident in the symptoms of decline so prevalent today, both in the North and the South. Homelessness, escalating crime, prostitution, and child abuse, juvenile delinquency, suicide, pervasive alcoholism and drug addiction. C. Cultural. In traditional Buddhist societies, concern with the accumulation of wealth and goods is subordinated to the pursuit of ethical and spiritual virtues. The Dhamma, as the peerless guide to thought and action, encourages such qualities as simplicity, contentment, generosity, and self-sacrifice. Wisdom is cherished above mere cleverness, moral purity above wealth and status. But with the rise of the industrial growth society, everything changes, as the drive to acquire, own and consume turns into a tyrannical master whose demands are implacable. The need to dissolve the attitudes enjoined by traditional Buddhist culture is inherent in the logic of global capitalism, and it is therefore naive to expect reform to come about simply by giving the giant corporations an injection of Buddhist precepts. The driving engine of the corporate economy is the need to increase profits, and to achieve this objective it must methodically undercut all those traditional values that discourage the acquisitive urge. The corporate leaders do not have to accomplish this by direct assault, and generally they will espouse moral values. But by subtly manipulating people's perceptions and ways of thinking at deep subliminal levels, the corporate system gradually transforms them into consumers whose lives centre around the unconstrained acquisition and enjoyment of technologically produced commodities. The most vulnerable targets are the young, who are encouraged to develop a culture of their own in which popularity and status are determined by what they own, wear, sing, and eat. The avenues of invasion are manifold. They include television, the cinema, videos, and music, which nurtures the rise of a global monoculture in which all traditional diversity is dissolved. Chain stores and shopping malls make their contribution too, providing the commodities essential to high status. But the most direct agent of attack is the advertising industry, which plants in people's minds the firm conviction that the ruling purpose of their lives is nothing more than to acquire and enjoy without the need for scruples or restraint. Buddhist Guideposts towards Development. At the present point in history, it is difficult to offer a well-designed practical plan for economic and social development that has already proved its worth. Standing at the threshold of the third millennium, we are entering a new frontier where we must work out new solutions to formidable problems by sheer trial and error. It is clear enough, however, that with the global industrial economy pushing the world towards the brink of catastrophe, we have no choice but to envision viable alternatives, and already in various quarters the search for new models is diligently underway. In what follows, I will enumerate a few simple guideposts for a Buddhist approach to development. The first task that Buddhism would have to undertake is to reverse a strange inversion of logic that lies at the heart of the industrial growth model of development. When we view this model in the light of the Buddha's teaching, it is at once obvious that it rests upon an extraordinary degree of abstraction from the concrete reality of lived experience. This abstraction takes place in at least two stages. First, the economy, which in traditional cultures occupies a subordinate place in the social order, is drawn out from its proper bounds and taken as the chief criterion for judging societal well-being. Then, as if this were not enough, the health of the economy is conceived exclusively in quantitative terms by means of such indicators as the GNP or GDP. These indicators measure only a country's total exchange of monetary goods and services. They reveal nothing at all about the qualitative nature of the goods and services exchanged. They do not register the social and ecological costs of economic development. They say nothing about how the wealth generated is distributed amongst the country's population. Yet a myopic fixation on bolstering GDP captivates the attention of policy planners everywhere, guiding the formulation of economic and social policy in virtually every country on earth. This narrowness of vision encourages a double parasitism, whereby the economy becomes a parasite on the social order, and both combined gnaw away at the planet's delicate ecosystem. The Four Noble Truths of the Buddha provide us with a powerful instrument for diagnosing the causes and results of this distortion of vision. The cause is ignorance, not seeing things as they really are, which provides a field for craving to emerge and bring entire societies under its dominion. When there is craving, as we know from the Four Truths, suffering is bound to follow, and this is amply confirmed when we survey the debris left behind by the global race toward development. The fundamental concept that must underlie any Buddhist approach to economic and social development is Dhamma, the natural, self-subsistent law of righteousness and truth realized by the Buddha through his enlightenment and communicated by his teaching. The primacy of Dhamma means that economic and social policy must be guided from start to finish by ethical norms. These norms are not mere matters of subjective judgment, personal and relative, but real and immutable laws written into the very fabric of being. This does not imply that there is one invariable form of social and economic organisation valid for all people under all conditions. A wide range of alternatives are possible, as diverse as natural landscapes. But for any such system to conduce to real human welfare, it must be grounded on sound ethical principles which encourage people to strive for moral integrity in their lives. A social system which runs counter to the Dhamma, which encourages or condones unethical behaviour, is bound to bring widespread misery and destitution, not only for human beings, but for the entire natural order. We can see concrete proof of this in present-day corporate capitalism. Founded on the idea that selfishness, greed, and unrestrained consumption are the keys to progress, the whole juggernaut drives us steadily towards global catastrophe. From the centrality of Dhamma to social order, two subsidiary principles follow. One especially relevant to the economic sphere, the other to the social sphere. The principle that should govern the economic sphere is, quote, the rule of sufficiency, unquote, which means simply knowing that enough is enough. The rule of sufficiency is both a policy of mental hygiene, contributing to psychological balance, and a policy of ecological wisdom, contributing to the preservation of the natural environment. In both respects, the rule promotes a sound economy in the literal meaning of the word, quote, home management, unquote, the judicious ordering of our internal home of mind and of our external home, the natural world. As a discipline of mental hygiene, the rule of sufficiency rests on the insight that human needs are hierarchical, as I will shortly explain, and that there is a point of satiation in meeting material needs, beyond which continued gratification becomes deleterious. This does not imply that we must all adopt ascetic lifestyles and deny ourselves even the innocent pleasures of life. But it does mean that when people seek to acquire possessions and enjoy sensual pleasures beyond their natural capacities, they do so at the expense of other needs, social and spiritual, which are equally crucial to their fulfillment. Thereby, they violate a law of human nature and bring harm to themselves and to those victimized by their avarice. As a policy of ecological wisdom, the rule of sufficiency teaches us that there are inherent limits to economic growth dictated by the insurmountable finitude of the ecosystem. Pursued beyond these limits, economic expansion becomes parasitic both on human health, physical and mental, and on the regenerative capacities of nature. When applied to our present-day situation, this principle teaches us that economic development, in the sense of continuously expanding production and obsessive technological innovation, is precisely what we don't need. Our economy is big enough already, far too big, and our technologies too smart, too powerful, and too much fraught with moral risk for beings as fallible as ourselves. What we need most of all is streamlining and downsizing. Cutting down on weapons production, on industries dedicated to wasteful luxuries, on conspicuous consumption as the engine that drives the economy. Instead, we need qualitative improvements to make our technologies more humble and humane, more benign towards the total biosphere, and above all, we need greater stress on economic justice and social equity so that no one need be deprived of a fair standard of living. The principle that should guide social activity is the rule of cooperation and harmony. But cooperation must be infused and animated by ethical motivation. The cooperation between superpowers to dominate the global political order in their own selfish interests is not the kind of cooperation we require. The mergers, corporate takeovers and business cartels formed to control the world economy, is not the kind of cooperation that accords with the Dhamma. Our current social order promotes competition rather than cooperation. The key word bandied about today is competitiveness. Such an emphasis is bound to generate conflict and resentment, splintering the social system into a multitude of hostile factions. A society founded upon the Dhamma recognizes that each person should aim to promote the good of the greater unit to which he or she belongs, and as a minimum should never seek private fulfillment in ways that inflict harm on others. The ideal is beautifully summed up in the, quote, 6 principles of harmony and respect, unquote, taught by the Buddha to the Sangha. Loving kindness in thought, word, and deed, sharing righteous gains, observing a common code of morality, and holding in common liberating views. In a Buddhist approach to social and economic development, the primary criterion that would govern policy formulation should be the well-being of a society's members, and this well-being should be viewed holistically, taking account of a wide range of factors. The economy would be assigned to the place where it belongs, as a subordinate domain nested within the wider social system. In turn, the social system would be viewed as an integral part of the total ecosystem, the indispensable foundation for all life. Thus, economic development would be guided along lines that promote the health and well-being of the social order without harming the natural systems within which human society is lodged. To the contrary, a Buddhist social policy would recognize the importance of preserving the natural environment, not simply to provide a continued supply of resources for the human economy, but as a positive good, both intrinsically and in relation to the aesthetic enrichment and psychological wholeness of its members. Society, in turn, must be recognized as an abstraction from the individual human beings who make up the social order. Thus, when we speak of improving the well-being of society, this ultimately means that social policy must seek to promote the welfare of individual people. How we set about promoting the welfare of people is contingent on our view of human nature. If we hold a materialistic view of human nature, then our efforts will be directed primarily to ensuring that their material needs are met, and we will see no reason to give attention to other factors. If, however, we hold a more spiritual conception of human nature, then we will recognize that other needs beyond material prosperity also call out for fulfillment. The Buddha's teachings offer a wide-ranging conception of the human person as a complex entity having a diversity of needs, which all must be met to ensure happiness and well-being. These needs fall into a well-defined hierarchy of importance, which we might here consider as threefold. At the base of the hierarchy is the physical need for the basic requisites of existence: clothing, food, comfortable dwelling, medical care, transportation, energy, tools, and so forth. At the next level are social needs for education, family, friendship, and personal intimacy, participation in a community, and meaningful work. At the highest level are spiritual needs for moral rectitude, mental development, and wise understanding of the true nature of life. A social order guided by Buddhist principles would create opportunities for all these needs to be satisfied and would see that no one is frustrated in their aspirations to lead a contented life. A Buddhist social order would begin by ensuring that all members of society are able to satisfy their material needs. But because the Buddhist teaching views needs hierarchically, It does not encourage the narrow fixation on material acquisition and sensual gratification so characteristic of contemporary culture. By pointing out that the crass pursuit of luxury and abundance is a root cause of suffering, Buddhism encourages restraint, simplicity, and contentment. By extolling generosity as a basic virtue and the mark of a superior person, it promotes a wide distribution of basic necessities so that no one has to suffer deprivation. For Buddhism, however, material satisfaction merely provides a starting point for the pursuit of higher goals. Since human beings are social creatures who naturally come together for common ends, this means that a social order, guided by Buddhist principles, would consist primarily of small-scale communities in which each member can make an effective contribution. Only small-scale social arrangements can rescue people from the ominous abyss of meaninglessness so pervasive in modern urban life. From a Buddhist perspective, the vast polluted megacities and impersonal bureaucracies characteristic of our era would have to be considered deviations from the natural order conducive to true human well-being. They are a travesty of our inherent need for communal participation. The local communities, consonant with Buddhist principles, would focus on the extended family as the primary unit of social integration. The family would be guided by Buddhist views and values, which they will serve to transmit from one generation to the next. The model for the entire web of social relationships would be that provided in the magnificent Sigalovada Sutta, Digha Nikaya number 31, where the Buddha minutely defines the reciprocal duties of parents and children, husband and wife, employer and employee, friend and friend, teacher and students, monks and laity. The economy most compatible with such a mode of social organisation would be small-scale and localised, using simple technology which does not drain natural resources. In such an economy, production would be aimed principally at local consumption, so there would be direct face-to-face contact between producers and consumers. Modalities would have to be worked out to bring about integration of the small local economies into a broader national and global economy. But the driving engine of the entire system would be the promotion of well-being, both material and social, not commercial profit and unrestrained expansion. But even a prosperous economy and a harmonious social order cannot satisfy the deepest need of the human heart, the need for meaning, for an ultimate purpose around which our lives should revolve, and a path of conduct to guide us through the thickets of difficult decisions. This need can only be met by religion. Religion not as a bond reinforcing a sense of communal identity, not as a legacy of traditional rituals and beliefs, but as a genuine path of self-transformation, opening upon a transcendent reality. Since in the ontological order it is this reality which claims the highest place, it follows that in the hierarchy of values it is spiritual values that should claim our deepest respect. Genuine spiritual values do not exist in a self-enclosed domain of their own, cut off from the rest of life. Rather, they spill forth and pervade all other aspects of our existence, sustaining them in a unifying vision and steering them in the direction of the highest good. Thus, in a sound and healthy social order, spiritual vision will guide the formulation of economic and social policy, ensuring that the latter do not stop short at mundane ends, but aim beyond themselves towards the dimension of transcendence. In a predominantly Buddhist society, the highest good is nibbana, and economic and social life would be seen as offering the opportunity for making progress towards nibbana. Though the final goal may be accessible only to those who embark on the austere road of renunciation, the Buddhist path reaches down into the mire of everyday life and spells out with clarity and precision the steps needed to advance in the direction of the final goal. Thus, in a Buddhist social order, the ceaseless struggle for mundane subsistence would be considered not as a mere series of technical problems in need of a technological fix, but as an opportunity for cultivating the virtues of mind and heart that lead to the highest. This gives us the ultimate meaning of development for a Buddhist society, the development of morality, concentration, and wisdom, culminating in full enlightenment and liberation from suffering. A true Buddhist social order would try to make this prospect available to its members by nurturing a sangha, a community of renunciate monks and nuns, and providing for their material needs. These renunciates, in turn, would guide the broader community in the Buddha's teaching and provide them with the inspiring example of those who have withdrawn from the cycle of production and consumption to devote themselves to a holy life. One last word is called for. It may seem that I have just sketched a plan that is beautiful and compelling on paper, but utterly idealistic and impracticable in fact. In part, I agree. To implement such a model will be extremely difficult, awakening staunch resistance from mighty sectors with immense wealth and power. But we have to recognize that in a world moving steadily to universal democracy, the final say in determining the forms of social organization under which we live must rest with people, with you and me. When a system assumes forms which bring extravagant benefits to a few and great misery and deprivation to many, there is no cogent reason for it to continue. All that sustains it is the naked ambitions of the elite at its helm, and the web of deceit they weave to hide the truth from ordinary people. Today, this web of deception is dissolving on many fronts. In ecological disasters, in increasing unemployment and economic injustice, in the waves of crime, exploitation, and social degeneration so visible everywhere, especially in the Third World, where most of the world's population lives. Large numbers of people who have seen through the mirage of technological progress and global capitalism realize that this system is unsustainable. Indeed, that it is ultimately harmful for its beneficiaries as much for its manifest victims. In many quarters, grassroots organizations, counterculture movements, and alternative think tanks, the search is on for a way to preserve this planet in the new century. To such people, Buddhism offers a message which is at once lofty and sublime, yet capable of addressing in lucid terms the hard realities of social and economic life. It is the responsibility of the Buddhist community to sound that message in its spiritual heights and earthly applications for the benefit of all living beings. This has been A Buddhist Approach to Economic and Social Development. From Facing the Future, 4 essays on the social relevance of Buddhism by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Narrated by Shalina Hetherington. Copyright 2000 Bhikkhu Bodhi. Audio production copyright 2023 Pariyatti.
Pariyatti, a non-profit 501c3 organization, offers a wide variety of books, eBooks, videos, and audiobooks about the teachings of the Buddha, the Pāli language, and Vipassana meditation. Browse our complete catalog at www.pariyatti.org.